Hi, hi, this is Jen Rubin for The Contrarian. I'm delighted to have with me the co-founder of Indivisible, Ezra Levin. Nice to be here. Nice to have
Hey,
you here.
great to be talking.
You had quite an event yesterday on Tuesday at the Treasury building. Indivisible called for a protest for a peaceful gathering, and a lot of people showed up.
It's great to see. I will say we had a call on Sunday night to respond to this crisis, the ransacking of the Treasury and the blatantly unconstitutional attack on our system of government. And 50,000 people showed up. About
Wow.
10 minutes before that call, Leah Greenberg, my spouse, our co-founder, our co-executive director, was texting with partners to see if we could get an event together in person at the Treasury. We got enough folks saying, yes, this is a good idea. No members of Congress, but enough of our friends and allies. They said, okay, let's announce it on the call. That is what we did on the call. Nobody in official congressional land had approved it at that point. But by the time of the actual event, members of Congress were beating down our door trying to get 2 minutes to speak because they just wanted to get in front of that crowd. The reason for this is, and I don't blame this for this. Members of Congress love to speak to crowds. They want to show that they're in the fight, and we should factor that into what we do because it means if we produce the energy, the noise, the crowds, they're going to show up and they're going to want to tell us what we want to hear.
And then the other half of the equation is they have to go back and do something. As
Indeed.
you pointed out, there were members of the Senate who came and spoke very eloquently, and yet the Senate is still confirming nominees. It's still going about its business. What is going on, and what will it take for them to, as you put it in the chat, shut down the Senate?
So here's what you got to know about pressuring members of Congress. First thing they do is ignore you, right? First thing they do is say, you're not serious. We're not even going to pay attention to this. It's not a big deal. That's step one. Step two is they say, oh no, there's a lot of energy here. We've got to do stuff that looks real. We've got to cover our butts, not actually take any real action, but try to feed that energy. Third step is they actually start fighting. I would say we're somewhere between step two and three right now. We are not at step three. We do not have unified Democratic opposition. I think we can get there. But just yesterday, that same day of this incredible crowd where 31 members of Congress came and spoke and riled everybody up and made some commitments actually on stage. We saw from Senator Chris Murphy, he said blanket opposition to any nominees. That's news. That's great. But also that same day, 22 senators voted for yet another Trump nominee to be Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Why on earth, when there is an ongoing coup, when Elon Musk, a foreign billionaire, is ransacking the Treasury, would you vote for any one of this man's nominees? Each one of those nominees is picked because they're bootlickers, is picked because they will follow every single step that Donald Trump tells them to take. You should not be voting for anybody. It's not about the individual nominee. It is about what is going on in the executive branch right now. And I want to be clear, this was not Indivisible's position circa 2 weeks ago. We said, pick your battles. Look, you don't have to fight every one. We were not running campaigns on every nominee. But when the facts on the ground change, I change my mind. And that's what happened for indivisibles all across the country. We have had 217 local events focused on senators' offices all across the country since we called for them on Sunday. People want to see Democrats fight. And so they're creating those crowds, and senators are showing up and talking at them at those crowds. But I'm not looking for chance. I'm not looking for empty promises. I'm looking for votes. I'm looking for action. And that's what people around the country are looking for. I'm hoping we get there, but based on the intel that I'm getting from members of Congress themselves or their senior staff, some of whom work in these offices that are voting for the nominees, they're telling me, Ezra, turn up the heat back home.
Yeah. And even worse, Pam Bondi was confirmed as Attorney General in the midst of a purge of the FBI, in the midst of a collection of information that potentially could result in thousands of FBI folks getting fired. It really is kind of mind boggling. And I think the question that I get from viewers, subscribers, listeners, readers is always, why don't they perceive a greater sense of urgency? Why does it take so much for them to even get to step two? Is it that they're living in a bubble? Is it that they resist the notion that we're under siege? What is the mentality you think that prevents them from gearing up faster?
The thing you got to know about the Senate, and I got to say, I was a House staffer, so even when I was there on Capitol Hill, I was annoyed by the Senate back then. But the thing about the Senate, it's got this culture, this collegial culture. You don't want to ruffle too many feathers, even Republican feathers. Everybody tries to go along and get along. There is some aspect here of living in a bubble, which is why it's so important for those of us trying to push the Senate to get really precise in our asks. I think there's a tendency to say something like shut down the Senate, which I chanted at the rally and other people chant at the rally. But the other thing we chanted at the rally, we chanted three other things and we got really nerdy about it. That's why I like the chants. One
Yeah.
was, what kind of opposition? Blanket opposition. The crowd chanted blanket at the rally. Blanket opposition. Love that. That's what we need. So not just I'm going to vote against this nominee, not against all consider, but eventually vote against. It's you need to announce blanket opposition to the nominees. Second thing, the crowd, this crowd of a few thousand people chanted, withhold unanimous consent, withhold unanimous consent. I mean, but it's important to get into specifics because it's not just enough to talk a big game. If a senator is actually using all their power, they're putting holds on every nominee and they're withholding unanimous consent so that normal business of the Senate can't just go forward. The Senate is not a majoritarian institution. It gives vast powers to the minority. One of those powers is refusing to unanimously move forward with the business of the day. Any senator can say, no, I don't want to do that. And suddenly everything slows down. And the third thing that the crowd chanted was constant quorum calls. Constant quorum calls. Again, nerdy, specific, Senate procedure could make your eyes glaze over. That level of specificity is important because you can see if your senator is doing it or not. So when your senator, who might be one of your favorite people in Congress, comes back and says, "We're fighting the fight," you can say, "Oh, but are you withholding consent? Are you calling for quorum?" Because if you're not, you're actually not using all of the tools at your disposal. That level of pressure is what we need now. And then when they do that, and I'm having reports that they're preparing to do this. When they do that, they need all the love from us. They need to hear celebration. We are not here just to yell at Dems when they fail. We need to support unified opposition when it comes together. So when somebody like Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester says blanket opposition, she should get a lot of love in Delaware. When Senator Chris Murphy says blanket opposition, he should get a lot of love. When Brian Schatz says I'm putting a hold on State Department nominees, it's a step in the right direction. He should get a lot of love. It cannot just all be stick. We got to have some carrot there too.
And to explain to people who aren't mavens of the Senate, what is a quorum call?
So here's the thing. I've said here's the thing a lot. There are a lot of things. Here's another thing about the Senate. Most of the time, if you're watching C-SPAN, you see some senator giving a speech. There's basically nobody else in the Senate. Nobody is watching that speech. The speech is not for other senators. The speech is they cut it up and they use it to fundraise from their constituents or from other people. That's the point of those speeches. But there is a rule in the Senate that says business cannot continue unless there's a quorum, a sufficient number of senators. So you know it's a real pain in the butt to get all of these very old, very lazy senators to actually fill the Senate chamber. That's a pain for the majority. Frankly, it's a pain for the minority too, which is one reason why they don't do it. On Friday, Senator Schumer cut a deal with the Senate minority to expedite some votes to prevent the use of the rules of the minority to get votes on nominees, and that's how we got votes on Monday. He did that because nobody wanted to work through the weekend. That's why the deal was cut. So it's not just the majority that doesn't like quorum calls. The minority doesn't like it any either. But I'm sorry, that's the job right now.
Yeah.
Maxwell Frost kicked off the rally at the Treasury Department yesterday, and he said, "We're not the minority, we're the opposition." I couldn't have said it better myself. We are the opposition,
Absolutely.
and in the opposition, you got to use the tools of the minority.
And you should be very proud to know that at the Contrarian, Norm Ornstein, who is one of the great political scientists, wrote a column suggesting exactly the same things that you were doing at the rally. So we at the Contrarian believe in the inside game, the outside game, the courts, the court of public opinion. So I think this is really important. And I think the other thing that you said that I think our listeners should take away is that you don't have to be in Washington, D.C. Everybody has a congressional office, a Senate office. They can use the telephone, they can go online. And actually, these people do care when they hear from actual voters in their constituency, in their district, in their state.
I would go a step further, Jen. Unfortunately, DC is not a state. We don't have senators. When I was a congressional staffer and I would see rallies in DC, I would say, huh, that's interesting. And that's about it. Because the way our Congress is set up, it's not set, is literally not set up to represent members of the DC constituency. They don't have voting members. What members of Congress do every single morning is they get a list of clips. Where were they mentioned in the papers in their home state or home district? And they want to see, are they being mentioned positively? Are they being mentioned negatively? And how do they need to adjust? So the one silver lining to this whole moment that we're living through right now that I'm grasping onto is in November, there were more new indivisible groups that registered with us. These are normal, everyday volunteers who said, I guess I got to start an indivisible group and start pushing. More new indivisible groups in November than any month since 2017. We then beat that number in December. We then beat that number again in January. When you look across the country and see these rallies popping up to push senators, these dozens or hundreds of people going to Senate offices. These are often new people who are taking it upon themselves to just make some noise. And that's what we need right now. You do not have to be an expert in Senate procedure. You do not have to live near the US Capitol. It's better if you live somewhere else and actually have a senator where you can put pressure and they can feel that pressure and then they can change their behavior. So I would highly encourage anybody listening to this. Donald Trump wants you to feel powerless. Some of the Senate Democrats want you to think that they're powerless. None of that's true. You have power. The Senate Democrats have power. They should use it, and you should use it. And it's as simple as bringing together a few friends, starting an indivisible group, or starting some other group, and focus on who represents you.
I could not endorse that more. Ezra, in all the years we've known each other, I think this is the first time we've actually spoken face to face. That's the power of the internet. But you're terrific. The Indivisible people are fabulous. And when people ask, what can I do? One thing they can do is join an Indivisible group and help be part of the effort to keep our democracy, to prevent the authoritarian takeover. So thanks for being with us. Thanks for all you do. And I'm sure we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you for starting the Contrarian. Free and independent media is oxygen for any social movement. We need you. Keep on going.